Hello and welcome to the Norse BenchWarmers podcast. I'm your host, Alex Perez, filling in for Colton, who is in North Dakota at his big boy job now. So congratulations to him, but you will be seeing more of him in the future. I am joined with producer Josh Northcutt and director Garrett Jordan. This is a special episode of the podcast today as we are joined by NFL Nation team reporter for the Cincinnati Bengals, Ben Baby. Ben, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thank y'all for having me.
Absolutely. So we're just going to do some personal question talk at the beginning and then some Bengals talk. That sound good?
That sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. Where did you find your love of journalism?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we had just talked about it before I came up here, and I've been very blessed that I've known for as long as I can remember. It's the only thing I've ever really wanted to do, and can't really trace it back to anything specific aside from the fact that maybe back when I was at my grandparents' house and they lived on the same street as my parents. They used to get the newspaper. They had cable, which was nice.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, if you wanted to follow your favorite sports teams, you had to read about it in the paper or watch the news on TV. And so, I think that's always been the biggest thing is knowing that if I didn't think I was ever going to be able to play. And so if the next best thing is being around it, is being able to cover it. So I remember being like in middle school, being like, all right, I want to go be on my high school paper. And then when I went to college, I said, all right, I want to go major in journalism. That was a big thing that I wanted to do. Went to school at the University of North Texas, was at their radio station at first with a lot of guys who I'm friends with who have been really successful in Dallas-Fort Worth marketplace, have done, really big stuff, been on some Marconi award-winning shows and programs and stations. And then now I was there for a little bit, but then ended up gravitating towards the newspaper side and been a newspaper reporter and now kind of an overall reporter ever since. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So speaking of about your upbringing, did you play any sports growing up?
I never played any sports. No, I like to play in the street a little bit. I'll run around. We'll play some pickup ball, some pickup baseball, football, whatever it may be. Then you end up going in whenever you get tired, go and play PS2 in the house. Back in the day, that's what I did. But no, I never really played a whole lot of anything. I think my favorite tagline in my ESPN bio, they might have taken it out, but was an undefeated amateur boxer with a record of 1-0, retired on top. I said, I don't want to put an L on the record, but that's the only official competition that I have under my belt. So no, I think it also, I tell people all the time, I don't think you've got to play sports to be able to understand it.
Very nice. So all of us in this room want to get involved in sports in some type of facet. So what would be your advice for somebody looking to get into sports journalism?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question in the time that we have now. Obviously, I think this is a great way to do it because we're seeing podcasting take up a lot of the bandwidth, no pun intended, in kind of the whole media space. I think there's so many different avenues and ways to get involved now. Back when I was coming up, it still was a very old-fashioned way in that you go and you go work for the newspaper and then you start covering high schools, then colleges, and then you get up to the pros, and that's a very linear path that we don't really see as much of anymore. I think the biggest advice that I give to students or anybody looking to get involved is trying to find a way to just get reps, get reps is where you can kind of learn the craft, figure out kind of what you like to do, what you can do, can you be involved with, how you can get better at that. And then over time, I think eventually, hopefully you'll start to kind of find avenues that help you figure out, okay, this is kind of the lane I want to be in. And then you kind of try to get your foot in the door. I remember I started out by working on my school paper, but my first non-school affiliated job was taking phone calls on Tuesday nights, and I got paid $50 on Tuesdays. My name wasn't in the paper for the first 3 months. It was staff reports, but people would call in their volleyball games or their basketball games, and they would say, hey, this is kind of what we played. This school, it was a 3-set match. This was the lettuce and kills, so you got to spell their name right, get their stats right, get their record, and then that was pretty much it. Put together a couple graphs. I kind of lied also and said I had some experience covering high school football. I did not. I had tried to work for technically it was a half lie, I guess. So really a half truth. But I remember when I was 16, I tried to go string for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, which was one of the big papers in the metro area. And we went out. I remember my dad drove me to the paper, and then we all went in the sports editor's car or the assistant sports editor's car to go to the scrimmage. We get to the scrimmage, and they apparently they canceled it without telling anybody, so we drove back. And so that was it. And then over the course of that was my senior year, they realized that I was 16, not 18. Nobody asked. I would have told them if they'd asked me, but they're like, yeah, we can't hire you. And so, but then when I went to the Denton Record Chronicle, they were like, do you have any experience covering high school football? I was like, kind of. I kind of trained a little bit, but that was enough. I mean, they took me out, they showed me the ropes, so it worked out. So I think that was it. And you kind of just have to be willing to, I think a lot of times, just take whatever opportunity you can and show someone that, hey, I can do well with what you've given me. And then when the time comes, you'll get a little bit more on your plate. You get more on your plate, and you keep doing well with that. And I think all the stuff that you learn at the levels where nobody's watching, or you think nobody's watching, all of those reps count, and you do the exact same thing, whether you got millions of people watching you on ESPN or you have nobody watching you doing, anything when you're doing starting out. I think it all is kind of the same to a degree. And so the more you can do that early, the better off you'll be.
That's awesome. So I know this is a really tough question to answer, but looking at your whole career so far, what would you say you're most proud of?
That's a good question. I think how you go about the job every day is probably what I'm most proud of, and that whether a team is winning or losing, it doesn't really matter. I've always tell people, like, I don't get any extra money when your team wins games. Like, I don't get a playoff check, I don't get a game check. And I tell coaches all the time, I said, whether you go undefeated or you go winless, I'm going to cover you the exact same way. And I think when things aren't going great, they may be a little bit more critical than others, but when things are going great, it may be not as positive, but you reflect what's going on in the field. And I think that being kind of as centrist as possible helps you do the job the right way. And I think that's something I take a lot of pride in doing, making sure that day in, day out, you kind of do your best job possible. And then over the course of your career, you end up covering a lot of really cool events, really cool stories, meeting a lot of great people. And we could spend hours going through at every job, whether I covered high schools, colleges, or pros, just the amount of people, whether it be a guy like Joe Burrow or a guy like Mitchell Bridges, a high school quarterback you've never heard of, but I was around him as much as Joe. I covered them the exact same way, and I take a lot of pride in covering those guys in the same manner. And so that's something that I kind of like to hang my hat on. And then you've had some really cool experiences like, covering a Super Bowl, covering fights in Las Vegas, being at the AFC Championship game is great, NCAA tournaments, stuff like that. I think probably the event that I'll always be proudest of, and the way that we all covered it as a team, was the Damar Hamlin incident in Cincinnati, just how we covered it, not only on site, but also our crew in Cincinnati, and then how we were in Bristol. I think all of that, at the end of my career, I'll be really happy with how we handled that in the moment, and really, I think, did that story the way it should be done.
That's awesome. Well, Josh had a few questions.
Yeah, I was at that game, and I could not imagine how you guys sorted all that stuff through. So if you don't mind me asking, how did that all go down? Because you mentioned it took a whole team effort. Was it somebody who just got told, okay, you're going maybe to the hospital, you're going to be on the phone with Bristol all the time, this and that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I remember, we had the guy who actually used to cover the Bengals a couple people before me, Coley Harvey. He was in town as kind of our TV reporter for that night. Also, it was on Monday Night Football, so we had a ton of people on site. So, it would have taken something extraordinary for me to be on television, because there was no reason for me to be on TV. We had many, many other people who were there. I was there in my capacity that I normally am for ESPN, where you're covering the game as the kind of the team reporter. But also, if there weren't as many TV people there, maybe, you'll be pressing a TV coverage, which happens, especially now that the Bengals have gotten better over recent years. But this definitely, there were other people who were going to handle all the TV responsibilities that night. My mom still likes to give me a hard time that I didn't bring a tie with me, because I was like, I didn't think I needed to be on television. And it was such a big game. The Bengals had just made the AFC Championship game in the Super Bowl the year before. We're in the midst of an incredible run. Really got hot at the end of the 22 season. Buffalo, one of the best teams in the league. I think Joe Burrow said it's one of the best atmospheres he'd ever been in for any game. He played college football at LSU, and I've been to a night game in Death Valley. It is, no offense to Bengals fans, that is a one-of-one experience. And I think that, Joe probably had a point that the vibes right before that game and around kickoff probably matched an SEC type atmosphere. And then when Damar went down, you could tell that, the way that everybody responded, it just seemed not right. And then I remember immediately grabbing my notebook, and I went to the elevator, and I was on my way we're all just watching. I'm like, well, I kind of need to be when he comes off the field to see what's going on, to get eyes on it. Just to be, I think the number one rule of thumb is just be around where the action is, whether that's, whether you're on the field or off the field. I think that's just a general good rule for coverage. is kind of be, as close as you can, be a firsthand account of what's happening. And so I remember I had a notebook in my hand, running to the elevator, and then all of a sudden my editor called me and says, "Hey, we need you to go to the hospital." So I just went and got all my stuff, didn't say anything to anybody, and just floored it through the garage and went down there. And just kind of set up shop. I think I was the first one there, so I was able to stake out. Okay, I was fortunate enough to have the presence of mind to know, okay, whatever spot I get is going to be the spot that we're going to hold down the rest of the night when all the TV crews end up showing up. So I made sure that we got a good spot that would have looked good on TV, and would have put us in a good position to report. I was in the emergency room for as long as they would let me until they eventually kicked me out. There wasn't really a whole lot going on, but just wanted to get people's reactions because, people were there for other things. Then all of a sudden, DeMar Hamlin comes in, and there's other stuff over the course of a given night that you're dealing with, and they have their own respective emergencies. Now all of a sudden, this all gets thrown in as well. So just trying to see what information the hospital could give at the time, which wasn't much of anything, but also kind of what the emotions were like inside there as well. Did anybody know what was really going on, because they'd be going and dealing with their own stuff as well. So we were reporting that, and then we went back outside, and then we kind of literally set up camp for the next 3-4 days. And then Coley, when I went back to go cover the team at practice, and then kind of the day-to-day on site, Coley did a great job with our crew. Paul Kramer, who I believe I learned is a Northern Kentucky guy.
Yeah.
Kramer's fantastic. Does phenomenal. I'm very fortunate every time I get him as a crew just to work with them. But they kind of took the mantle from there. We finished strong that week. But yeah, it's kind of surreal how it all went down. But I tell people all the time, it's no different than covering an event. You go out and you sign up to cover whatever's going to happen that day. Sometimes it's just a game. Sometimes there's other stuff that happens. But I think you have to be ready and have a good enough, an education, and a good enough background, and a firm enough stance on kind of how to cover things, that when something like that does happen, you're ready and you can answer the bell when that time comes.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I was at that game, and when you talk about that atmosphere, I had to agree. It felt like a playoff game. Mm-hmm. We all were looking forward to it, and then that happened, and it was like the air got sucked out of the entire stadium. Everybody got silent and kind of realized how it was bigger than the game. You also mentioned the highs and lows of covering the team. So how do you balance being objective when covering a team so closely, especially during the highs and lows, so you don't lose access to the players? Because I know sometimes the players will cut off announcers or reporters and be like, "Yeah, I'm not taking an interview question from you anymore."
Yeah, I don't really care, to be quite honest. If somebody says they don't want to talk to me, that's fine. I think I can do my job, whether they do it or not. I think the thing that you always want to show people is that you want to be fair to them, and you want to really understand where they're coming from at all times. And even if they're not playing well, a lot of fans will like to pile on when somebody's not playing well. And I'm like, listen, if somebody's out there giving it their all, they're trying their best, it's just not working for X, Y, and Z, I'm not going to sit here. And I think being objective is great in that way, because I'm not sitting there upset that they're not playing well for my team. I'm trying to get an understanding of, hey, why isn't it working? Why aren't you throwing the ball the way you'd like, or why aren't y'all winning as many games as you would, or why isn't the sacks kind of where you want it to be? All of these different things. I think when you're objective, it's easier to come from a place of understanding and saying, hey, and you got to understand, the players also know they're not doing what they need to do as well. It's not like I'm breaking any news to them. Like, hey, you're not playing that well. He's like, oh, no, really? You're kidding? When I don't have a good Sports Center hit, or I don't write something well, I'm going to be the first person to tell you exactly how it went down and why it wasn't good. So no one's ever breaking any news to me when things don't go well. And so sometimes, I think when that understanding's there, they understand the way I'm going to cover them. So if I was a massive homer or really was a non-objective person, then all of a sudden I got critical, they might be like, whoa, where's this coming from? But I think they all understand kind of where the way that I go about doing the job. And that's to go what I said earlier, answering about some of the things that you look back on or whatnot. I think that the way, if you have, I think that's why you take pride in how you do it day to day, because that stuff really matters. It stands the test of time. There have been players who have been like, yeah, I'm not talking to you. And okay, if you have your reason, that's fine. I respect it. If there's something that I did wrong and that is objective, that you feel like, and if I'm in the wrong, I'll be the first one to apologize. But if it's something where you think, something is unfair in coverage, but it's just objective, and we lay out, okay, this is why we covered it. Here are the reasons. and you may disagree with it. And if you want, if you go about it in the way it says, I don't want to talk to you, that's fine. I'm not going to take it personally. I'll be honest, if I'm a player, I think it would, it'd probably be annoying to have media ask me questions all the time. And so I appreciate when they do take the time to do it. But most of the time, I think people understand where we're coming from, and I think that's what counts.
And then also, how do you handle social media and the crazy fan base that sometimes you may write something that they don't quite agree with? And I can't imagine what your DMs would look like or even your comments. So how do you handle the era of social media?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember asking a coach, I talked about this with somebody recently as well, kind of how they developed thick skin. And they were, the first head coach I covered, Joey Florence, high school coach. He was telling me about when he was he was a play caller at a tiny Texas high school football school in town, but they were all into it. You sit there and you get second guessed by parents in the middle of you giving out the play call and in the middle of the games, wondering why their kid's not playing, why their kid's not getting the ball, why you're not a good coordinator. And eventually, over time, you kind of develop a thick enough skin. And if you do the job the right way and in the best way you know how, you can feel good about it, even if it doesn't always come. The execution isn't what you want it to be. You know that you came about it from a process standpoint in a way that you feel good about. And you keep refining it. You keep working at it. But I think that helps because, and I tell people all the time, I think you have to have a sense of conviction in how you go about doing things, because that will help kind of steady you in a sense whenever when there are a lot of questions on how things go, whether you did the right thing, whether it could have been better, whether you shouldn't have asked this question, you should have written this, that, and the third. If you have convictions on how you go about doing something on a daily basis and have a real firm understanding on how you believe something should be done, then I think it's easier to take that criticisms. And honestly, I'm thankful when people are angry or mad or upset, because it means that they care enough to consume the coverage. And I think that's kind of the understanding that you have with viewers or readers, that it's two-way street. If I'm going to produce something for the public, if the public doesn't like it, then I have to hear about it from the public. And and honestly, it's been great around town. A lot of people have a lot of when I see them in person, have a lot of great things to say, which has been awesome. We've developed some really good communities on social media over the years. But I think you just have to have an understanding of it comes with the territory, and sometimes it'll cross the line, and you've got to ask people that there's people whose opinion I value more than others. And I'll ask them, hey, people are angry about X, Y, and Z. Did I do the right thing? And then they'll kind of give me the feedback. And if I did the right thing, then, then you kind of have to weather the storm for a little bit. But if there's something I could have done better, then you kind of have to cop to it and say, okay, this is what I need to do moving forward. So I think it's just having a firm understanding of how to go about things, and then just kind of taking that and putting it all into perspective.
Appreciate that.
And then Garrett?
Yeah, Garrett, you got a question or two from some of the listeners over there?
Yeah, sure. I got a couple listener questions I can toss your way. So first one here I have from Ben, kind of going back to some of that career stuff. He asks, what are some of the challenges that you faced early in your career? But I can extend that to even now, because obviously we all face challenges. So just any challenges you faced?
That's a good question. I don't know what the challenges really, really are. I've kind of tried to stay as oblivious to those as much as possible, as weird as that sounds. I guess the biggest thing is probably being far from home. I remember when I took my first job, out after school, I worked for my local paper full time when I was in school, and then had that job for another year. And then I moved 5 hours away. And that wasn't really easy, going somewhere where you don't really know anybody, having to pick up. That's where I met my wife, which was great. And then we moved here and kind of did the same, moved back to Dallas, where I'm from, or the Dallas area where I'm from, and then worked there, which was awesome. And then, got the opportunity to come to Cincinnati, and it was kind of a similar situation. Don't really know anybody. You're coming for the job. You don't know what it's going to entail. We've been just so amazed at how great the Cincinnati area is. I tell people all the time, we were really fortunate to be here, not knowing anything about it. It's been awesome. Our community's been great. We've been found a good church to get plugged into. Found a lot of great people around here. It's been awesome. We couldn't have picked, honestly, a better town to know nothing about and to come into. And going around a lot of the country, we feel like this is a really good spot for us. And this is as close to a second home as I've ever had anywhere. I think Texas will always be home, but Cincinnati will have, for whatever, however my career ends up going, always have such an affinity for this place, which is great. But that's really the biggest challenge is how do you balance, some of that work-life balance and kind of, taking those big risks. And for me, I've always been like, I want to go see, chase this dream for as long as I can, try to do it to the best of my ability for as long as I can do it. And then, mercifully it's worked out. So I'm very happy that it has, but you still just kind of every day, that challenge is how do you wake up? How do you be better? But there's still a lot of things I want to accomplish, a lot of goals that I have that I haven't gotten to yet. And it's how do I get there? How do I get better? I've been doing this now almost 15 years, but getting to where like the people that I continue to admire, how far they've gotten, all the heights that they have. Like, how do I go and chase those goals to take that work to the next level? And I think as long as you're chasing that, I think it's just such an exciting endeavor that you are every day. You're like, all right, I want to go out, I want to attack this, and I want to see what I can do. And that's what's fun about being in media, is that every day you get a chance to go out and put together something really, something truly special. And it's like playing baseball. You go out, you get a new at bat every day. You get to go out there. Even if you go 0 for 4 one day, you get another chance to go out there. You might go 0 for 4 again, but eventually you might start making contact, hit some home runs. And I think that's what makes it such an awesome profession. And that's what makes it exciting.
Awesome. And then speaking of that work that you do, a question from Bobby here. What does a day look like in a beat reporter's world? I know that'll vary wildly based on whether or not you have a game that day, but what does a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, game day is easy because I get to get up, especially on the road. I like to do some game day miles, go run a little bit to clear the head, and then get ready to go down to the game. That's always the game day is the easiest part of the day of the season, whatever it may be. But like during a typical day, like a Bengals are practicing on a Wednesday, you'll wake up, you'll start working on, if you're writing something for the website, if I'm working on a feature, if I'm working on something later on in the week, try to get my lights to write when there's not a lot of stuff in my head. As the day goes on, you end up thinking about more things. So the more clear-headed I can be, I try to write and then really try to, once I get done with writing, try to start checking in with sources, try to start making calls, sending texts, doing all of that, and then you get ready. We'll have, usually a coordinator availability around 12:15. Then we'll have, I believe Zach Taylor, the Bengals head coach, will talk around 1 o'clock. And they practice at 1:30. And then sometimes, I'll have a Sports Center hit, especially if the Bengals are really newsy and really, in an appetite where Sports Center really wants something, they'll like right after we come off the field, I might come in and do a 2 o'clock Sports Center hit right off the top of the hour and then come back in. And then when the Bengals come off, we're back in the locker room. Joe Burrow comes in. He'll do his presser. We'll work the locker room. And then sometimes they're like, cool, now let's go back on NFL Live. And so it's 4 o'clock. And then I've got to go out and write a newser. In the middle of that, I'll send the news desk something. Then we'll go back in, knock out a hit for NFL Live. Then I'll say, okay, like now I'll have time to write a little bit. And then Sports Center may come back and say, hey, we want you on for the 6 o'clock. So let's go on and get that going again. And so that's a whole process. And so when it gets really busy, it is a full day. But it's a lot of fun. I think it also goes to show, it's a good way to kind of, display kind of the skill level and the craft that goes into it. I think I take a lot of pride in being able to do TV at a hopefully a high level, but also write kind of at that level too. As someone who has primarily a writing background, being able to do both has been something I've really enjoyed. And now, especially with social media playing a big part of it, I've really shifted kind of my content strategy more so kind of to photos and videos really that fits Instagram's algorithm and kind of their model a little bit better, because I think that's where things are heading to anyways. So it's been good doing that over the last couple of years. So it gets really busy, but it's a lot of fun. One of my producers, Laura Chapnick, who's phenomenal when I get to work with her, she's like, you just need to slow down sometimes and go on these TV hits and take a little bit extra time. I said, Laura, if I had the time, I'd love to, but I think sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. So definitely a work in progress, but it's a lot of fun. And you getting to work the locker room and getting to be able to put all that stuff together for TV and for print or for digital, it's definitely a blast.
I think that's what's kind of interesting is a lot of people probably don't think about that other stuff. They just see your article on the website and be like, oh, that's all he does every day. But to see how much you actually have to do throughout the day is almost a little stressful to think about, but it's also, as you said, probably really fun and entertaining and why you got into the business.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't think people realize how much work goes into even a 1-minute Sports Center hit. Because we'll talk about questions the day before, we'll go through all the notes, then they'll figure out what storyline might be best, what fits the show best, and then we'll go through, kind of craft it, and then you'll go in and then do the hit the next day. But I mean, all that stuff is done hours and hours in advance, and it's, even if stuff happens the day of, you're still in collaboration with the producers of that specific show, because they run their show a certain way, so you want to make sure that you're an asset to them and fit their show the best way possible. You're thinking about that as you go through things. So yeah, that's all stuff that's been really eye-opening for me over these last few years for sure.
So we ready for some Bengals questions?
Sounds good to me.
All right. So I'll be transparent. I'm not really a Bengals fan.
No. Be fully transparent.
I'm a Steelers fan. They don't really like it too much around here. So I feel like I could be a little more objective than the guys in this room. But who are you looking for to step up on a defense that has so many questions?
Yeah, I think for me, it's got to be Cam Taylor-Britt. I think, I think that he's always had Pro Bowl capability last year. And, he's kind of copped to it, didn't have the confidence that he would have liked towards the back half of the year. I think the easiest thing to pinpoint is ever since the Washington game where, I think he correctly said that Washington runs a college-style offense. I think a lot of people took that as a negative where he said, no, they get the ball out quick. They're going to take their checkdowns. They're not going to be, do anything, insane. You just got to go. They're going to go out and beat you in this way. And Cliff Kingsbury, he's formerly a college coach, has that background. And ever since then, Cam kind of quieted down kind of his talk to us in the week. And you saw kind of a dip in his confidence, and I think he said that's something that he's got to get back to is play with that juice. I think that's something he takes a lot of pride in. But that's going to be a big question. And the Bengals, if he plays up to his capability, are they going to be able to have the money to re-sign him? Depending on what happens with Trey Hendrickson, we see the money they've invested in the offense. Does that mean that DJ Turner needs to continue to step up? And even if he doesn't start, can he figure out how to be a really good starting corner? And he's shown flashes of that. At times was playing really good before he got hurt, really well, I should say, before he got hurt against the Chargers last year. And so I think Cam Taylor-Britt and those corners, they really have a big opportunity. And if they can play well, I think it's going to help out the defense a ton, regardless if Trey Hendrickson's there or not. I think, your pass rush, they have to have the time able to go out and get the quarterback. If your secondary is getting beat quickly, it just doesn't work. And also, if your secondary, you can only hold up for so long if your pass rush doesn't win. So, the one thing that everybody on that defense will tell you, it's got to go hand in hand. You got to marry up, the coverage, the back end with the front end. But I think, Cam has the capability of playing well. I think now is going to be the year, especially in a contract year, where it's all going to come together.
And Josh?
And that also was like the one position they really didn't address. They're going to trust the guys they got in the room. So as a Michigan fan, I'm kind of excited to see Dak's back, the 5th-year option picked up, and hopefully a healthy DJ Turner to go along with CTB. But you wrote about Trey Hendrickson yesterday. You've talked about him probably almost too much this offseason, so I won't dig any deeper, but I will encourage everyone to check out Bengals drafting a DN affect Trey Hendrickson's future on ESPN.com. I'll put the link below. So instead, my first question is about protecting Joseph Lee Burrow. It's well known he's been sacked the second most time in the league since being drafted, and that last year was the first time he's played a full 17-game season. Do you think the guard position has been addressed enough? Do you think the Twitter cries for Brandon Sheriff or Dalton Reisner will be listened to? Or is Lucas Patrick, Dylan Fairchild, and then Scott Peters enough to solve the issues that were guard play last year?
Yeah, I think that remains to be seen. Obviously, they drafted Dylan Fairchild, I believe, 3rd round out of Georgia. He's going to come in. It sounds like left guard's going to be his spot to lose. So then at right guard, are they going to look at, Lucas Patrick, Cody Ford, Cordell Volson, what's going to look like behind them? Cordell, his cap hit is going to be pretty high. Would they want to, if he does win the job, do they want to invest? Would they like to maybe recoup $3 million potentially in change and give that money to Trey, or, save that money for Cam, or figure that out moving forward? Every dollar counts, and especially with the way that the Bengals cut their deals, they want to probably accelerate as much cash as possible early, so that way they're not sitting there 4 years down the line with an insane cap hit. They've got to restructure a lot of contracts. They like the flexibility that comes with the financial situation of being under a salary cap, and so I think that's a big question. But it's funny, all the guard talk has been, I think, quite frankly, a little overblown. I think people look at the production and the sack totals. Last year, when Orlando Brown was healthy and the Bengals were still within playoff contention, so before they were 4-8, Burrow his sack rate was a lot lower. You're seeing a lot less free blitzers come through. I thought the line held up well, and I think that as the season progressed and Joe felt extra pressure to perform, you saw him maybe holding onto the ball a little bit longer, knowing he had to go out and make plays, knowing the defense wasn't doing what it needed to do, and every possession there was a greater sense of urgency to end up with a touchdown. And I think Joe has always been he's been very open about this. I'm not really nervous about getting sacked. Now, he may not love it all the time, but I think that, there's a trade-off. And, I think some of that, there are some things that line needs to be played better. Obviously, they move on from Alex Kappa. They bench Cordell Volson. So they've acknowledged there need to be some things better about that interior. But I think the way the Bengals drop back, given what the price points are for guards, I think that, I understand the logic in the way they went about it. Now, if it doesn't work, then we'll go back and say maybe they should have done a little bit more. But I understand what they're doing. It makes sense to me. And I think a lot of times pressures and protections and how well you're able to keep your quarterback upright, a lot of that's on the quarterback. It's also a lot on the play caller as well. You've got to put your quarterback in good positions. You've got to be able to do a good job of keeping the defense honest. The quarterback's got to do a good job of playing within structure, helping out his line. So there's a lot of things that go into it. But I think given what we saw at the beginning of last year, I feel like if the Bengals are in a neutral situation in terms of, there's overall season, I think that should bode well for Burrow.
I also am really interested to hear or see what happens with Scott Peters. Obviously, this offseason, he's been the talk of the conversation. His new technique, more hands-on type stuff, and what I've seen from your coverage and also just local media, it seems like he is more hands-on with the players and going out there and bumping up with them. But you mentioned, obviously, the draft. They had 6 picks. You already kind of gave your thoughts on it. It's been a week since then. Have you heard anything, seen anything that maybe changed your mind on a player and possibly what they can fit a role in on this team? And then if not, what are some of your thoughts on some of the undrafted free agents? Because Seth McLaughlin is obviously getting a lot of conversation locally, being an Ohio State guy. And if he can come back from the ACL tear last season, some people have hopes that he could maybe be the future center or guard for the Bengals.
Yeah, I think you're asking a lot of undrafted guys to come out and produce. I think anything you ever get from them, if they can even make the roster, that's a big win. I don't think people realize how difficult it is to just be on a 53-man roster. And if you're an undrafted player, it makes it so much more difficult to get that way. I think, the bulk of the conversation is going to be about who they drafted. And, those first 3 guys that they drafted, you're talking Shamar Stewart, talking Demetrius Knight, linebacker out of South Carolina, and then Dylan Fairchild, guard out of Georgia. Those 3 guys have to come in and I think really earn spots as starters for this team to go well. Or, in Shamar's case, maybe not even to be the starter, but he needs to be getting a good amount of reps and he needs to be productive. I think that's a lot of pressure you're putting on him as someone who didn't have a lot of production in college at Texas A&M. But, you talk to his former college teammate, McKinley Jackson. I know the guy who recruited him at A&M, the late Terry Price, has a great eye for defensive ends. The athletic testing scores through the roof for Shamar, but he's got to be able to translate that into sacks. I think for this draft class, how they're going to be judged and graded is that they've got to go out and really produce and be effective. And, if they can if Demetrius Knight turns into a 3-4 year starter for them, I think that's great. If Shamar Stewart can one day be opposite of, whoever, an edge rusher, whatever happens, I mean, the uncertainty there is going to be pretty high because not only do you not know what's going to happen with Trey Hendrickson, Joseph Osai on a 1-year deal, you don't know if Miles Murphy's going to really pan out. I think it's going to be a make or break year for him, former first-round pick from 2023. So there's a lot of different ways this can go. But, I think they're banking on a lot of players really coming in, fitting in, and being more productive than maybe they were at the college level or what they're projected to be at. And so anytime you get past the 3rd round, you're asking a lot from 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks. So we'll see. I think Taj Brooks, an interesting guy. Can he come in and really be help with, kind of be round out that running back room, which they haven't had in recent years. I've loved Travion Williams to death. Is probably personally will be my all-time favorite player to cover. I've covered every single one of his games for the last 9 years, which is insane to think about because I covered him. We both started at Texas A&M. At the same time, I started covering A&M for the Dallas Morning News his freshman year as a true freshman. And then I ended up here right after he got drafted. So I've been here for like nearly a decade of his life. He's probably known me as long as he's known anybody at this point. So, now they have, 4 different running backs or a different quartet of running backs in that room. We'll see how they complement Chase Brown. But, they really need a hit on this draft class because, the margin for error is very thin.
I definitely agree with that as a fan of the 35 years. I'm dying to see the Lombardi down there on Fountain Square. And then we have a few more questions from the listeners, I believe 2 more. Garrett?
Yeah, so I had one, but you kind of answered it already. It was, did you have a favorite player to interview while you were here in Cincinnati? It feels like you kind of answered that one already just now. So that was a question from Doug and Jason. So I'll go ahead and move on to this last one, which you don't have to answer. It could be conflict of interest for you. But Steve-O asks, do you see a real possibility that the Bengals play anywhere outside of Southwestern Ohio?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so my second favorite, like personally, I love Travion. T. Higgins is probably one of my favorite personalities, you know, and I think that he's grown a lot in that way. I think it was a big win for the media, the fact that he stayed in Cincinnati. I've always been like, for the last few years, I've been prepping. I'm like, he's not going to be here anymore because I really just like being around him on a daily basis. I think that's probably the most fun part of the job. Like, I'll be honest, I could care less about how the games go. But like how I get to, like the best part of the job is getting to know the guys and what makes them tick and what makes them great. Like, it's cool being around. I told this to Joe Burrow last year. I said, honestly, you know, it's really cool that you like to watch somebody go out and really push themselves to be great every single day. It's a very rare thing to be around. And that's really cool to see that firsthand, seeing T kind of go through what he's gone through and really fight all the injury history and all the questions about him to earn that second deal has been really cool to see. And he's been great to deal with, a really engaging personality, fun guy. Always likes. I love talking watches with T. It's always a blast. And so that's probably my second favorite. You know, it's probably a 1A, 1B situation, much like the receiver situation between Travion and T. And there's honestly so many fun guys in that locker room to deal with. It's very hard to find somebody who you can't go up and just have a conversation with like they're normal people. And I think that's something people don't really understand, is that even though they're playing football, like this goes for anybody who plays sports, that they are just normal people. They live and do a lot of the same things. They eat a lot of the same stuff that we do and have a lot more in common than we realize. And I think part of the fun for me is trying to highlight that out and say, hey, I think it's good for the players as well to realize that they have a lot in common with the fans as well, and trying to kind of bridge that gap. And so when people are watching, I think when sports writers and sports media, when they're doing their job in the best way, in the optimal way, it's that every time a fan is watching a game, they feel like they have a greater understanding of who's playing. And I think that it's a great way to humanize the athletes, especially when things don't go well, when they lose, and they understand that, the players are taking it as harder than the fans are, because they put a lot of work and you want to display all that. So that's fun. And being able to document that, I think, is one of the joys of being in the business. And then I think, sorry, what was the second question was whether the Bengals will ever play anywhere outside of Southwest Ohio?
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, the big question to watch. Obviously, they've made some progress, the Bengals and Hamilton County recently, trying to move towards kind of an initial phase 1 of a 3-phase approach to renovate Paycor Stadium. Now, they have to agree to terms by June 30 for that to be enforced, and that means that it looks like they're trying to eye a long-term agreement. And so, I think as we look around the NFL, really look around the country, how much cities and communities are willing to subsidize pro sports teams. I think that appetite, it's hit or miss. And so, you have to go to a place that you can make money in, but also have that tax base that's going to want to support that. I think we've seen over the years that a lot of municipalities are not really engaged in that. They're saying, why don't we try to get our tax dollars somewhere else? The NFL, these pro sports teams, they make a lot of money already. And the Bengals, how much money are they going to be willing to invest in? I'm very curious to see how that goes. Something we'll be covering extensively over these next few years. The Bengals can exercise options all the way up into 2036. I know a lot of people ask me about it. I'm like, listen, the Bengals just got a new locker room a year ago. Like, our media workroom is currently under renovation. They're building, I think, a whole new, like a broadcast, like kind of an area that they're doubling essentially what they built last year. So they're making a lot of renovations. And so I imagine they'll want to be here for at least a couple more years. Otherwise, not really sure why we're spending this money. So we'll see. But I think that long-term question is something that, is going to be on top of everyone's minds. And, I know that the Brown family, they love being in Cincinnati. They've been here for a very long time. Obviously, Paul Brown founding the franchise here, really both franchises in the state of Ohio. So, that means a lot to them. And seeing how that gets worked out, I think that's going to be more than anything on the field. I think that question is going to be the thing that kind of dictates everything about this franchise over these next few years.
And then one last question for me, if you're okay with it. You mentioned that you still have those goals and dreams to chase. 5 years from now, where does Ben Baby want to be?
Everybody always asks me that. I always say I want to do I would love to do whatever I'm supposed to be doing, like, and just do it to the highest level possible, and I don't ever envision being anywhere else than my current job, and I've loved being at ESPN. In whatever the way they want to use me, that's the way that I want to be an asset to them. I think it's a very, one of the reasons I left the Dallas Morning News, and I'll tell people all the time, the only thing that ever would have got me to leave the Dallas Morning News, which was really my dream job growing up, was, to go cover the NFL for ESPN, one of the best sports leagues in the world, if not the best sports league in the world, for the best sports media company in the world, bar none. Just being able to see how well can I hack it against some of the best. And like a lot of my colleagues and friends, I think they're some of the best in the country at what they do. And so every day you wake up and you go, I want to be better than them today. I want to go out and be like, I'm dropping a good scoop in the group chat. I'm dropping a good story here. I'm going on SportsCenter. And if someone's going on before me, I want to have as good a hit as them or better. And we're all pushing each other to be great. I think that's really what you want to do. And I think that if you would come at it with that mindset, that like all the rest of it takes care of itself. Like, I think, to be honest with you, I never thought I'd do this. Like, I never thought I'd even work in Dallas to that degree. Like, Dallas is it's one of the best newspapers in the country, one of the best sports sections that you'll find anywhere. Historically, really good American journalism that has been a high standard and really set the bar for every other sports department in the country for decades. So that was a really, really good paper I left to come here. And so, for me, I thought I'd cover high schools for as long, and then maybe like if I'm 30 and it doesn't work out, I got to go make more than $12 an hour. Then I guess I got to go and do that. I don't got to at some point be able to, afford a livable wage. And so, I've outlived my wildest dreams so far. So I don't really know what's going to happen in the next 5 years. I didn't think, I couldn't have forecasted that, had this run being as long as it's been, and it's been great. I think when you go in and the easiest way to fail is expecting something down the line that you don't know is going to be there yet. Because the longer that you don't get it and things don't work out that way, you only get more discontent, you get more frustrated, it creates a lot of unhappiness, and you end up not being the best version of yourself. And I think I teach an adjunct sports class at Southern Methodist University, SMU in Dallas, and whether it's my students there or other people coming into the business, I tell them, I think the only thing that you can really do is be the best version of yourself every day. You want to try to max that out and max out whatever potential you've been given, whatever talent you've been blessed with. Just do that and try to bring the most out of that. And eventually everything else will work itself out. If you want to do this, you want to do that, whatever it may be. It may be something you haven't even thought about. Like I could say something now, but there might be something better that's not even something that's remotely on my mind. I mean, especially in the current landscape of the media, maybe something that doesn't even exist now. But if you just keep doing the best job possible, doing whatever it is you do at the highest level, you'll put yourself in a good position moving forward. Like if we're being honest, I didn't apply to come work at ESPN. They reached out and asked if I would be interested. And it wasn't something that was ever on my radar. I didn't say, I want to go work at ESPN one day. I just said, I cover this team. I want to go out. There's a lot of really good people who cover college sports. I want to go do that really well. There's a lot of good reporters at my paper. I want to go out and be as good or if not better than all of them. And then eventually it just kind of puts yourself in a good position. I think it's like you can't create luck, but you kind of will try to take advantage of it wherever you can. I think you want to try to, when the opportunity presents itself, you just want to be ready to take advantage when it comes across your plate.
That's a great answer. And that had to be a little bit surreal, ESPN reaching out to you like, hey, do you want to come work for us? Not so much you going after them.
Yeah, I mean, no, there was a full application process.
Yeah,
and if I wasn't the guy, then they would have went out. They got plenty of other people to go and do that. But no, I think it's been like every time that I sign a new deal or each successive season, I don't take it for granted. Like at owners, this was my first year at NFL owners meetings, and I think my IG caption was, you never take a seat at the table for granted. And I think when going back to the earlier question about being a homer, I think when you don't care about the team success, like the teams I cover, that doesn't matter to me. Of course, you hope that everyone does as well as they should or whatnot. But the way that you do the job, that's what counts. That's where you show how good you are. And I like to compete. I like to go out and do things at a high level. And I think, that's why I'm here at ESPN. I want to come out. I want to do that every day. And if not, I want to ask him, why isn't it going better? And so, yeah, I think it's really something that you don't take for granted. It's a great company. Like every time I'm on SportsCenter, like it's awesome. It's a really cool feeling, being able to sign off a hit saying Ben Baby ESPN. It's great. It's been a big blessing, and I'm very grateful for it. And I want to make sure that I do, like I said earlier, you want to maximize everything you have. And, hopefully I'm still scratching the surface, and there's other things that I want to be able to do and really kind of do, hopefully that comes. But, I think all in due time, and every day you just kind of keep stacking them, and hopefully things work out for the best.
Well, Ben, thank you for your valuable time and insight. It means so much to us here. So that will do it for this edition of the Norse BenchWarmers podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Norse BW Pod. Thank you again, Ben. Thank you, Josh. And thank you, Garrett. And thank you to NKU Media Services for being able to make all this happen. And then we will see you in the next one. Peace.